Welcome back. This is part 2 of our study of the virtue of meekness. Again, we're in the third week of Lent, looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. So in the first part of the lesson, we zeroed in on what did meekness mean. Meekness means to be gentle, to be humble, and we said a lot of the things that it's not. So what does that look like? Really, when a person is meek, they're going to act and react differently than someone who does not carry the virtue of meekness. So while some may act aggressively, a person who is meek will walk in peace. While someone might be demanding their rights or claiming their rights, a person who is meek may be focusing more on duty. While someone else might seek revenge, someone who's meek may simply make room for God's judgment rather than seek revenge. We also said that it does not imply weakness or sadness or being subdued, and it's definitely not a false modesty or a false humility. Basically, a believer who joyfully considers his own life worth nothing when compared to the greatness of God is a believer who has truly embraced meekness as a virtue. And when I say that, someone who joyfully considers his own life or her own life worth nothing compared to the greatness of God, if you've been listening to the other lessons, that should sound familiar. It takes us back to the idea of being poor in spirit or spiritual poverty, that I have nothing of my own and need constant help from God. It's a natural comparison and a natural transition that if I have this gift of spiritual poverty, this virtue of spiritual poverty, out of that, there's a natural transition to, compared to God's greatness, I'm not all that. We see this where Paul describes to the Philippians in his letter to them in chapter 3, verses 7 and moving forward from there. He says, I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ. So what is he talking about here? It's such a powerful statement. This is just on the tail end of Paul listing all his lineage, his Jewish lineage, his Hebrew accolades, everything that he was once known for. And he says, I once thought these things were valuable. These are things that used to matter to me. Sometimes when this is quoted out of context, people attribute material things to it, and that might be true. It can be made to fit, but here Paul is saying these other things, this idea of being special, being important, the pride that comes with that, those things used to be valuable to me, but that's not humility, that's not meekness. So meekness as a virtue really flies in the face of culture. It flew in the face of culture then as well. Because remember, who Paul is speaking to and who Jesus is speaking to, the audiences that they address are similar. You had the Jews who took great pride in the lineage that they came from, being able to name the family and the family before that and who begot who. Those lists are important because they make a connection back from one generation to the next. But there was also a lot of pride that was taken in being a true Jew or a true Hebrew, if you will. The other audience that was present for these speeches, both for Jesus and for Paul, is the Romans. And the Romans took great pride in their power, great pride in their construction, great pride in the cities that they'd built. And so pridefulness and accolades were the thing for Romans as well. And you see them taking pride in these things, and you see Jesus saying, no, meekness is the virtue that matters, not this great pride and these things that you've built that matter so much to you. Paul is saying these things used to matter, they don't matter anymore. And then you also had the Greeks who took great pride in their wisdom, who were themselves, thought themselves the greatest minds of their time. And again, Paul says these are not the accolades to fall back on, that these things are worthless. He counts them as garbage later on when he's speaking about the things that he used to value. So as a believer who is embracing this virtue of meekness, who's seeking the Holy Spirit to produce meekness in me, I have to joyfully consider my own life nothing, worth nothing when compared to the greatness of God. It's that turn the other cheek business. It's a radical approach to life that says, I don't always have to be right. I don't always have to argue. I don't always have to have the last word. I don't always have to have everything be fair. I'm okay with taking a back seat sometimes. I'm okay at letting someone get over. That somehow I trust that God is in every situation and that I don't have to be the one fighting tooth and nail, aggressively seeking out what's rightfully mine, but that I trust that the Lord is actually fighting on my behalf, that the Lord is fighting on my behalf, that the Lord is representing me, and that if I trust that, meekness is being produced in me, and I can sit in that and not fire back every time I feel fired on. So it actually takes a great deal of strength. It takes a great deal of humility. It takes a great deal of spiritual maturity and poise, as we defined it earlier, to allow meekness to spill out of us, to be that outward expression of an inward humility, strength, and spiritual poise. So our challenge this week is to really explore that for ourselves. This, like all the other virtues, is a difficult one. As we said in the first lesson, this first part of this lesson, it's not one that I can produce myself, but it is one that I can pray about and ask the Holy Spirit to produce in me. That I would be made meek, and that in that my mind would be changed about what meekness looks like, that I would recognize that it's not weakness, that I'm not a punk because I'm meek, that I trust that the Lord is on my side, advocating for me. And so even when in the flesh, I might feel like I'm getting got or being gotten over on, that there is a way in which Christ will work it out. And sometimes that just means allowing meekness to flow out of me and seeing how God will get the results some other way. Wow, that's a tall order. So my prayer this week and my challenge for you this week is that you would submit this to prayer, that you would challenge yourself to find those situations where you feel like you need to aggressively seek your rights, where you need to act aggressively and demand something, and instead focus on duty, walk in peace, and allow for God's judgment to enter in instead of seeking revenge. I will check back in midweek after a few days of you struggling with this and see where we're at. I look forward to our midweek check-in, and we'll continue in prayer for you as this week moves forward. God bless.